End of February 1945. Berlin is the capital of a Third Reich that only a few months ago had more than 2,500 kilometers from end to end, but at this moment it has barely 500, placing the Soviets very close to the same bunker of Hitler. One of the most famous characters of all those found in Berlin is Joseph Goebbels, who will end up committing suicide along with his wife on May 1st. Despite the criticality of the situation during those last months, Goebbels did not abandon his habit of writing his diary, and thanks to that we have the thoughts of the propaganda minister, when everything around him was falling apart at times. This diary was not intended, far from it, for the general public to have access to it, and if it survived it was totally by chance. This means that what is written on it has not passed through any filter, and the words are written as they were dictated. Thus, and based on this diary, we are going to analyze what were the 5 main concerns that Goebbels had during the last 2 months of his life. With that said, let's begin. In the first place, the theme that is present in all the entries that Goebbels makes in his diary is that of the indiscriminate bombing that Germany is suffering. On this matter, the German minister highlights the following negative points. One of them is the large number of houses that are being destroyed, and with it the hundreds of thousands of families that wander from one city to another in search of a place to live and take refuge. On this matter, he also highlights the cold and the needs that many Germans are going through, including hunger. Another negative aspect of the bombings is the destruction of all German art and culture, whether they are buildings, museums, sculptures, or any element of an artistic nature. One that he focuses on the most is the destruction of the city of Dresden. Although the 2 points that we have just mentioned are undoubtedly very important, there is another that concerns Goebbels above all else. This is the one related to the loss of morale of the German population. And it is that we have to do an exercise of imagination, in which we are being bombarded practically every night, with the enormous stress that this entails. To put it succinctly, and as the minister himself points out in his diary, many people already preferred a painful ending to endless pain. This led many to fiercely criticize Göring for not being able to prevent these bombings. Goebbels agreed that Göring was completely useless and that he should have been removed long ago. The propaganda minister insisted again and again on Hitler to give the post of Göring to someone else, and although the German leader was also not happy with the state of the Luftwaffe and with the leadership of his boss, he did not want to give this step. According to Goebbels, these criticisms did not remain only in Göring, because during these last months part of the German population began to also criticize Hitler, and his popularity and respect was falling a lot. This was the truly worrying thing for him. Finally, Goebbels highlights a single positive aspect of the bombing that Germany is suffering. This alludes to the fact that all those who have lost everything no longer have any material concerns and therefore will fight to the end as revenge. We are now going to move on to the second issue, this being the loss of morale on the part of both the population and the army, which led to the resistance not being as tough as expected. Goebbels notes over and over again in his diary the indignation he suffers every time he learns that a German city has surrendered without a fight. At this point, what happens in his hometown of Raid, near Aachen, is of special interest. This small town surrendered without a fight, and an acquaintance of Goebbels, who according to the minister was a true National Socialist, made himself available to the Americans to be mayor, after telling him that the National Socialist Party had pressured and coerced him in the past to join him. In any case, and after telling this curiosity, Goebbels complains again and again that there are no men capable of complying with the orders of extreme resistance, whatever the cost. On March 22, 1945, Goebbels notes the following. In the Reich, an orderly leadership is practically impossible. We no longer have transport connections and news. Not only our cities, but also our industry is mostly wrecked. The consequences are the profound decline of German war morale. The inhabitants of the western provinces can no longer sleep and therefore become nervous, hysterical, and irritable. The consequences of this are obvious. In short, the situation has become unsustainable, and that is why we must do everything possible to achieve some achievement, however modest, at least in one area of our military strategy, and restore the health of the people. A few days later, Goebbels comments that the Allied propaganda is increasingly read carefully by the Germans, and that although before they did not dare to collect and read the leaflets that the planes drop, now they are beginning to do so shamelessly. Furthermore, there are more and more cases of Germans being caught listening to English radio programs. Under these circumstances, Goebbels affirms that it is increasingly difficult for his ministry to influence the Germans. Before moving on to the next point, let's look at a last entry by Goebbels on March 27 regarding the little resistance offered by many Germans to the Western Allies. Kesselring is very concerned about the attitude that more and more German civilians are taking. Here the population comes out to meet the Americans with white flags. They are usually women who even lower themselves to the point of greeting and hugging Americans. After seeing these scenes, the soldiers no longer want to fight, and either retreat or surrender to the Allies as prisoners. Kesselring will then allude to another matter, which will be precisely point 3 of the program. And it is that such telling Goebbels that his troops are crumbling, he comments that he sees it very necessary that Hitler addresses the people in a last final harangue. Both say that a speech by the Führer at that time would amount to a military victory. This was without a doubt one of Goebbels' greatest concerns in recent weeks, and he had him ask Hitler on many occasions to give a radio address to the people. The objective of this speech, as we have just said, was to raise the morale of the German people. Hitler's response was that he also saw it as necessary, but that he did not decide to give it, because he did not know what to say. His last speech to the nation had been on January 30th, and had had a much lower impact than expected among the population. Hitler commented that since no military achievement could be announced, no good news could be given, and therefore, the effect of it would be to instill greater pessimism. On March 31st, Goebbels noted in his diary the following: "The Führer promises me to deliver his speech to the German people as soon as possible. But as has been said, he first hopes for the success of his measures on the Western Front. I'm somewhat skeptical that he actually wants to talk anytime soon. The Führer now has a fear of the microphone that is completely incomprehensible to me. He also knows that it is not right to leave the people without a speech now, but unfortunately the security service informed him after his last speech that the people had criticized that he did not contribute anything substantially new. And it is that in fact, he can no longer contribute anything new to the people in terms of good military results. However, I tell you that you can always launch some slogan to raise the morale of the population, in the face of these tough battles that we are going to face." Finally, Hitler was avoiding the issue, and this final speech was not produced, as Goebbels wanted. In the opinion of the propaganda minister, this was a serious mistake, and he compared it to what Stalin and Churchill had done in their day, since both had given a great speech addressed to the population, just when the situation was most difficult for their respective countries. Thus, and since Hitler was hesitant to give this speech, Goebbels himself had to do it on April 20th, once the battle for Berlin had begun. The fourth point of the program takes us to the internal crisis that, according to Goebbels, was about to explode on the Allied side. In his diary, the minister makes continuous allusions to the problems that the situation in Poland and some other countries such as Finland or Romania was causing on the Allied side. Goebbels indicates that both inside the Soviet Union and in liberated France, and even in Great Britain, the population was beginning to go hungry, and that was going to greatly weaken the different governments. The question of the strikes that, according to Goebbels, were hitting the British in their own territory, is also a very important issue on which he makes numerous references. In short, this was one of the last hopes that Goebbels had to reinforce his idea that he had to continue resisting, because soon his enemies were going to fall due to his internal problems. And finally, let's go with the fifth and last great concern that the German propaganda minister had, in which he put a lot of effort. We refer to the creation of a series of groups of German partisans, in the territories that the Allies have occupied within their country. This organization was known by the name of Werewolf. Goebbels makes special mention of this group of fanatical defenders, beginning mainly on April 1, 1945. His idea is to create a radio station and a newspaper specifically for them. As we already talked about the Werewolf in a specific program, we will not spend much time on this point, but perhaps the most outstanding thing is that the fame and popularity that the minister gave him was much greater than what he really had. This led to a very large psychosis on the Allied side, which led to the execution of many Germans who were really innocent. It is estimated that on the Western Front, some 6,000 Germans were executed for the slightest suspicion of belonging to this organization. On April 2nd, Goebbels noted the following in his diary: "Our werewolf activity now causes considerable fright on the enemy side. Now there is real fear of a partisan Germany that could put Europe in the greatest state of turmoil for years." Finally, and despite the desperate efforts of the propaganda minister, the impact of these small groups organized behind enemy lines was practically nil. Well, so far today's program, which I hope has been of interest to you. As you know, I love war memoirs because they offer you a first-hand view of the events, and here I show you the Goebbels diary book that I used on this occasion. We say goodbye here. Many thanks to everyone, especially the sponsors who make this possible. Subscribe and share this program if you liked it, and see you in the next one. See you soon.